The hall rose like a cathedral forged from crystal and gravity. Seated in concentric tiers, the council buzzed with the muted clamor of alien languages, each filtered and rendered into smooth, sterile standard through the translator nodes embedded in every delegate's collar. Above them, the ceiling shimmered with a projection of the known galaxy, 1,000 stars pulsing softly in a map that humans had only recently learned to read. Ambassador Elias Reyes sat alone, his presence an anomaly against the vibrant biological variety around him. He wore no robes, no armor, no displays of heritage or power. Just a plain black diplomatic uniform, Earth's crest stitched in subdued thread above the heart. No one addressed him, not yet. His silence didn't bother him. He'd learned early that in these chambers, the louder someone spoke, the less they understood the stakes. A creature composed entirely of transparent filaments raised a limb and cleared its voice through a sonorous ripple. Let the 73rd session of the Galactic Council convene. Opening matters pertain to border realignments near Sector Theta 7 Tau. Representative Kayla of the Methene Empire, you may begin. Reyes didn't react. He let the procedural formalities play out. Petty disputes between old empires posturing over resource-rich debris fields. Objections filed, motions raised, amendments proposed and voted on. It went on for over an hour. It always did. And humans, newcomers in every sense, were rarely granted the first word. Not unless blood had already been spilled. When the topic finally turned, it came with the kind of indifference that would have provoked laughter, if the context weren't so cold. A matter of aggression by a non-member state against a human-held installation has been submitted for review. The presiding moderator announced. The Earth delegation has the floor. No one looked directly at him. Reyes rose with the smoothness of someone who didn't need to feign control. He pressed his palm to the console, activating his translator, and let a second pass before speaking. On the 12th rotation of Standard Cycle 942 Delta, an assault was launched by Drazari forces against a world identified in your records as territorial holding for A-113. You refer to it in shorthand as Frontier Sector New C. That world is called New Carthage. It was home to 12 million of our people. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. A ripple passed through the delegates. One of the Lorics, a crystalline species who'd once negotiated peace treaties that spanned generations, clicked in a gesture of confusion. That sector is known to be lightly inhabited. Not a recognized cultural anchor. Reyes's jaw twitched, an almost imperceptible shift. It was not a listening post. Not a supply depot. It was a fully settled world. Cities. Libraries. Art. Families. A four-eyed representative from the Valari opened his mandibles. Regrettable. But such attacks are an unfortunate part of galactic expansion. The Drazari are not council members. Their aggression, while reprehensible, does not constitute a formal act of war under our charter. That's exactly what I came to speak about, Reyes replied, the calmness of his tone now holding weight. Charters. Words. Definitions. There was an uncomfortable silence. Not hostile. Not yet. But it hung there, suspended like ionized dust before a storm. The reports suggest, said the moderator, that the human colony failed to broadcast a continuous identification signal as required by interstellar safety regulations. This may have contributed to the targeting error. Reyes nodded once. A system fault during a solar flare. Temporary. 3 hours. And in that time, the moderator pressed. The attack occurred? It's regrettable. Another silence. Then Reyes spoke again. We registered 12 million deaths. Confirmed. A few glanced at him now. Others studied their data pads, pretending to parse logistics or doctrine, unwilling to meet the quiet weight behind his words. For most, it wasn't malice. It was distance. Detachment was easier when you'd never stood on soil that still held your ancestors' bones. He stepped back from the podium. I asked nothing at this moment. No motion. No sanction. I came only to state the facts, as you've asked. The moderator looked mildly relieved. Then we'll consider the human grievance entered into record. The matter shall. You misunderstand. Reyes interrupted, not loudly, but clearly enough to freeze the moderator mid-sentence. He didn't continue. Not yet. He simply let the silence stretch one heartbeat longer than expected. And then he sat down. The council didn't realize it yet, but the temperature in the room had changed. They would remember that silence far longer than they remembered the hour of border disputes that preceded it. The recording played for exactly 18 seconds. No images, just sound. A static crackle, a brief warning in a child's voice, then screaming. Not cinematic. Not dramatic. Just raw. It ended as abruptly as it began, the last second silence save for the whine of atmospheric decompression. Reyes had played it once, without commentary. He hadn't explained. He hadn't needed to. No one in the chamber asked for it again. Still, the implications didn't land. The silence that followed was the same kind used to smooth over awkward moments between empires, not the kind that precedes justice. The council defaulted to procedure like a drowning man reaching for the shape of a rope. A delegate from the Arcana, a race that prided itself on analytical neutrality, finally spoke. Unfortunate, yes. But isolated. The Drazari are fragmented. Uncoordinated. It's unlikely the action was sanctioned by a governing body. Reyes didn't react. He let the assumption hang, like a trap waiting to close. The settlement's location, on the fringe, was an error of human expansionism. Another added. No proper orbital defenses. Minimal fleet presence. Vulnerabilities invite opportunism. It wasn't a military target, Reyes said. It wasn't even near contested space. Then perhaps, said de Villari, you should consider filing a formal negligence complaint against your colonial administration. We have precedent for self-liability in cases of systemic failure. His expression didn't shift, but something in his stillness became colder. You're suggesting 12 million people were responsible for their own deaths. De Villari clicked his mandibles once, an ancient gesture meant to denote logical closure. The galaxy is dangerous. Even among peace, risk is the constant. Peace, Reyes repeated quietly, almost to himself. That word, repeated and sterilized through policy, echoed longer than it should have. The Drevian ambassador, older than most species' recorded histories, tilted his head, speaking slowly. No one here supports the Drazari action. But they are not one of us. Their laws are not our laws. Our council has no jurisdiction over a sovereign force beyond its boundaries. Reyes's gaze sharpened, not in anger but in precision. That's incorrect. Murmurs followed. He continued, measured and exact. The Drazari may not hold council seats, but their trade routes are guaranteed by Charter Article 7. Their access to interstellar infrastructure, port relays, communications arrays, jump gate calibration, comes from this body. They benefit from our network. Our neutrality. By that logic, every act of aggression from a non-member state falls under our jurisdiction. One delegate objected. No, Reyes said. Just the ones you protect with silence. That froze several in place. He placed a small object on the console, cylindrical, plain. A data core. Recovered from the Drazari command vessel. Fragmented logs, most corrupted. But this file survived. A pause. Council communication frequencies. Timestamp 3 weeks before the attack. The core blinked once. I won't speculate on what was said, Reyes continued. I'll leave that to your internal audit. The implication hit hard. Not an accusation. Not yet. But not far from one either. You believe a council faction enabled the strike? Someone asked, half challenging, half fearing the answer. I believe your systems were built to prevent transparency, Reyes replied. And that the price for that convenience has been paid, in full, by my people. A long breath. One of the aquatic representatives opened a private channel, already withdrawing from visible debate. Others followed, subtle gestures of distancing. A delegate from the Cthal, until now silent, leaned forward. If your objective is retaliation, Ambassador, know that escalation outside Council protocol is grounds for. I'm not here for retaliation, Reyes said, voice like iron wrapped in diplomacy. I'm here because this Council failed the principles it claims to uphold. Silence again. Then, coldly, he added, if this chamber is only a monument to caution, then the next time, we won't bother bringing evidence. There was no reaction at first. Then the realization dawned, not just of what had been said, but of what hadn't. The human fleet had not retaliated. Yet. And if the Drozari attack hadn't been random, if someone had turned a blind eye, then this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. A Mathene delegate shifted forward, voice wrapped in practiced indifference. Ambassador Reyes, you refer to a colony, not Earth itself. Your tone suggests disproportionate response. Reyes didn't blink. You assume we define home as narrowly as you do. A few delegates exchanged glances. The word had landed wrong. Or perhaps too precisely. He stood again, not slowly this time. His voice didn't rise, but it filled the chamber. You attacked our home? The sentence passed through the translation matrix with perfect clarity, into a dozen syntaxes and tonal languages, none of them softened. The chamber did not respond immediately. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. An Ilari representative shifted nervously, glancing toward his interface, perhaps expecting clarification. None came. You think home is planetary, Reyes continued. That it must be sacred soil, birthplace, a singular origin. That is your mistake. Silence. Stillness. For us, home is wherever we plant something worth defending. Wherever our dead are buried. Wherever our children speak their first words. New Carthage wasn't an outpost. It wasn't temporary. It was ours. The Quran speaker, made of living stone and memory, leaned forward. You imply equivalence between Earth and a colonial station. Reyes shook his head. No. I imply that when we bleed for a place, build it from raw stone and atmosphere, raise generations in its light, then its destruction is not strategic, it is personal. Another silence, this one longer. We are not species of instinct, offered the Drevian. We measure response in scale, not sentiment. Reyes met his gaze. Then you've misunderstood humans since the day we arrived. He touched the console again. A projection rose, city layouts, cultural centers, education hubs, rendered in ghost light. Not defenses. Not shipyards. Life. The kind that doesn't make headlines until it's gone. We didn't scatter into space to claim territory. We fled a world choking on its past. Every colony was an act of hope. Every city an answer to a question we nearly failed. He paused. Let the images linger before shutting them off. You see a map. We see family. The Valari's translator clicked. If you expected your grief to translate into governance, you misjudged this chamber. Reyes didn't answer that. He stepped around the question, not evasively, but intentionally. We came here because you told us this council existed to prevent chaos. To enforce peace. We played by your rules. Contributed ships. Signed your treaties. Accepted your judgments, even when they cost us. We believed in this structure. And now you threaten it? Another voice challenged. No, Reyes replied. Now we outgrew it. That hit harder than anything else. You speak of unity, muttered one of the insectoid delegates. Yet bring confrontation. Perhaps your kind were never fit for diplomacy. Reyes turned his head, just enough to answer directly. We were told our emotion was weakness. That our attachment made us vulnerable. But we've survived by remembering. By refusing to forget the faces behind every casualty. He looked across the tiers. You believed restraint was nobility. We believed it was trust. And you burned it. A new silence, taut and expectant. The Drozari aren't the story. You are. Because when they came for us, we didn't ask how many ships they had. We asked who allowed it. And when the answer wasn't clear, we looked here. No one spoke. Next time, we won't ask. The words weren't shouted. They didn't need to be. Every representative in the chamber understood the weight beneath them. Not a threat, not quite. Just certainty. A line drawn not in policy, but in loss. Reyes sat again, final. And for the first time in the council's recorded sessions, no one filled the silence that followed. The next delegate to speak wasn't from one of the major blocks. It was a minor species, the virile, known more for trade than politics. Their representative, usually silent, spoke in a soft, resonant voice. If the council fails to act, what outcome does humanity foresee? Reyes answered without pause. We don't forecast outcomes anymore. We prepare for consequences. A murmur rippled across the tiers, not from surprise but recognition. The tone had changed. Formality had collapsed. In its place, something colder, truth without protocol. You accuse us all. A Lorix delegate snapped. But we did not launch the attack. Reyes leaned slightly forward. No, but you accepted its aftermath. You weighed response against cost. You decided outrage was inefficient. That is complicity. Another beat passed. One of the aquatic emissaries adjusted the fluid chambers around its seat, indicating discomfort. A Cthal analyst interjected, voice sharp and precise. What would you have this council do, Ambassador? Mobilize against a species we do not govern? Sanction half the outer corridor? Declare war based on implications? You misunderstand, Reyes said. We're not here to request action. We're here to record in full view that you refused. The phrasing was deliberate, past tense, already decided. One of the arcana, quick to detect shifts in political gravity, spoke next. This is not diplomacy. It is indictment. Reyes gave a faint nod. Correct. That word silenced further objection more effectively than debate ever could. You entered this council knowing the balance we protect, the Drevian said carefully. If every tragedy is grounds for retaliation, there will be no peace. There was no peace, Reyes replied. There was tolerance mistaken for agreement. We tolerated indifference because we thought time would earn us equity. We were wrong. Another pause. Then you intend to go to war? One delegate concluded flatly. No, Reyes said. We intend to stop pretending we aren't already in one. A collective stillness settled across the council. The point was no longer theoretical. Reyes continued. You mistake quiet for stability. You mistake restraint for weakness. But our silence was never submission. It was patience. That patience has ended. One of the Velari leaned forward. If Earth chooses unilateral action, you risk being expelled from the council. Reyes didn't look away. You can't expel what's already walking out. No one responded. The implications landed harder than threats ever could. He continued, voice lower now. We came to learn from you. To cooperate. To build something better. But your model depends on compliance, not partnership. When attacked, we were expected to wait for permission to defend ourselves. When ignored, we were expected to thank you for listening. He paused. We will no longer ask for your definitions of legitimacy. We define it by the lives we defend. A few of the larger powers began exchanging silent comms behind their delegates, unseen but unmistakable. Old empires calculating risks, updating threat assessments. The Methene representative tried to pivot. Surely, there is a path back to understanding. No, Reyes interrupted. There's only a path forward. And we'll walk it whether you join us or not. The declaration wasn't bluster. It was closure. Final and unshaken. You may dismiss this moment, he added. You may assume we'll return, that time and necessity will soften our posture. But you are wrong. This is not a negotiation. This is our line in the void. He stood, not seeking response, not offering explanation. And still, none came. No counterpoint. No offers of mediation. The council, for all its experience and history, had no script for this. Because they had never seen a species walk in as a student of diplomacy and leave as a power. The silence that followed wasn't uncertain. It was realization. Reyes didn't wait for permission. He keyed the Council exit code into his console, ending Earth's formal link to the current session. The indicator blinked red, severed. Symbolic, yes, but more than that. It was precedent. No human representative had ever disconnected unilaterally. Until now. No one followed. No one called out. They watched. What mattered had already been said. Within hours, news of the session rippled through the channels, first quietly, then in waves. The Council didn't issue a formal response. There was no declaration, no censure, no apology. Just silence, meticulously crafted to appear neutral. As if silence still meant authority. But outside that chamber, the reaction wasn't silence. It was acceleration. Human fleets shifted. Patrols rerouted. Dockyards once scheduled for upgrades transitioned to wartime protocols. Civilian convoys received military escorts. Old treaties with neighboring species were reviewed. Quiet alliances grew teeth. In remote systems, signals once thought inactive reawakened, deep satellites, listening posts, fallback shelters. Plans laid down generations ago, dismissed as outdated paranoia, were suddenly relevant again. Across human space, the tone changed. Governments didn't ask for unity. They expected it. Civilian leadership did not urge calm. It urged readiness. Grief hadn't faded, it had crystallized. The Drazari noticed first. Their raiding fleets vanished from key lanes. Not because of engagement, but absence. Entire sectors emptied, not by treaty, but by decision. Some called it retreat. Others, evacuation. No one called it coincidence. Then came the movement. Not invasions, operations. Targets struck with precision, not vengeance. Relay nodes disabled. Refueling stations neutralized. Supply chains severed. Not a single civilian structure was touched. Humanity didn't mirror the crime. It illuminated it by contrast. The message was unmistakable. We saw what you did, and we are not you. Council observers submitted requests for clarification. None were answered. No human delegate responded. No explanation was offered. Earth, it seemed, had left the conversation and begun writing its own. Diplomatic channels with sympathetic species remained open. Not warm, but functional. A few smaller civilizations issued statements of quiet understanding. Not approval, just recognition. Others watched in calculated silence, unwilling to choose sides, but no longer certain where power rested. In the background, humanity's colonies stopped seeing themselves as peripheral. The idea of Earth as center was quietly dissolved. From Mars to Titan, from Vesta to New Carthage's memory, they shared one doctrine now: unity through resilience, not proximity. Culturally, it began to reflect. Art shifted. Music turned darker, sharper. Literature spoke less of stars as mysteries and more as trials. Not fear, but resolve. Memorials rose not only on Earth but across a dozen worlds, carved not in sorrow, but defiance. Names of the fallen etched into hulls, satellites, orbital rings. A generation came of age knowing exactly what had been lost, and who had allowed it. Humanity didn't become cruel. It became clear. Strategists and council factions recalculated projections. Earth, once considered years behind in fleet capability, began to eclipse expectations. Not because of numbers, but doctrine. Where others wavered, humans adapted. Fast. Their simulations didn't mimic old wars, they trained for silence, betrayal, loss, and survival. By the third cycle, no Drazari force entered human-adjacent space. Not one. A void opened, vast and cold, bordered not by walls, but by warning. And still, Earth said nothing. That silence was the final escalation. Because for centuries, the Council had relied on dialogue as control. On protocol as power. But humanity had learned. Words could frame truth, or dilute it. But action was absolute. It wasn't domination. It wasn't conquest. It was a promise, fulfilled without flourish. You attacked our home. We remembered. And now so will you.